I'm going to introduce Sara Sandland. She is a certified health and wellness coach who specializes in maternal well-being and the motherhood experience. As the founder and owner of Notably Well, Sara helps moms improve their energy, overstimulation, overwhelm, fulfillment, fertility, weight management, and more through feasible and sustainable adjustments in their lifestyle, behaviors, and mindset. And I just feel like this is something every mom I know needs to hear. Thank you for being here
Absolutely.
today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really admire how you put a spotlight on ways to transform challenges into opportunities. And I'm happy to be here to discuss how moms can apply that to motherhood.
Yeah, I love the way that you said that. Because that is, I feel like so much of life, we're handed a lot of different things that can just challenge us and derail us, complicate things. And it's what we do with those things that matters most.
Completely agree. Spot on.
So, your journey into the space of wanting to help other moms with their postpartum and with everything that comes with motherhood. Tell us a little bit about how this started for you.
Yeah, definitely. So I've always had kind of a passion and interest in the motherhood experience. So from pregnancy throughout motherhood. And that combined with my own personal postpartum experience really just grew that interest more and more. And it turned into this passion for helping moms, rebalance both physically and mentally postpartum and throughout motherhood. So I'm happy to talk through my own experience specifically and kind of like my journey through. Um, when I was when I was postpartum, I felt like the main symptoms I was noticing for myself were exhaustion and overstimulation. So I wasn't just, it wasn't just, I'm tired or wow, it's been a busy day. I'm excited to go to bed. It was like physical exhaustion where you just kind of crash and feel like everything's just a lot of effort, things that wouldn't normally be a lot of effort. And I especially remember just crashing in the afternoons, specifically, just trying to find that energy for the last few hours before bedtime to, entertain my child. And then overstimulation, I just felt like I was a bit more on edge or overwhelmed by
Mm.
things that I normally wouldn't be. So just, more reactive or more sensitive to things like tantrums would feel more upsetting or overwhelming to me versus just being able to stay in more of an unbothered state. And these symptoms didn't really become apparent for me right away. I was in that normal, like very normal survival stage of having a newborn, with a sleep deprivation and everything. So at the time, it just felt like par for the course and didn't feel abnormal. But I felt like I was actually doing pretty well. But then I kept feeling that exhaustion and overstimulation for longer than I really felt was normal, like even 2 years later.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I can relate. And I think probably most every mom I know can relate to some of that to some degree. And for me, I feel like much of it comes from the pressure that you feel like you should just kind of know what to do and how to handle things. And even just all the things you think you did to prepare yourself for something as epic as motherhood, which sounds ridiculous in hindsight to me. Um, but I was one of those people, and I think that you have shared that you were as well, where it's like you thought you did all the things to prepare yourself for becoming a mom and having a baby, and then it happens, and it's like you're drowning.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and I know a lot of other women do the same thing, but I put a lot of energy and effort and time into planning to have this, healthy and optimal pregnancy and birth experience, but I didn't really give much thought or attention to the postpartum experience. And in hindsight, I think it's because I felt like, oh, pregnancy, birth are all such normal, natural things, and my body's just going to naturally know what to do afterward to rebalance. without much effort or attention on my part, because why would we biologically be made for it to happen any other way? So
Yeah.
yeah, especially if you're not thinking about it and you don't really know what could happen or what to expect, it can really catch you off guard.
Oh, 100%. I went into it thinking that like I've done a lot of hard things before and my body is built to
Mhm.
do this. So for sure, like I know it's going to be painful and I know it's going to be challenging, but it's going to go the way that I want it to. And I'm going to have the experience that I've painted in my head that I should have. And for me, none of that was true. It
Right.
was absolutely opposite of what I thought was going to happen in terms of bringing a human from my body into the world, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's a lot of relatability in just thinking something's going to be one way and then it's absolutely not. And then how you deal with that. How do you come to terms with this isn't what I thought this would be like, and then feeling like because of that you've done something wrong or that you're failing somehow.
Exactly. There's that societal expectation component that I think is present in a lot of moms' minds of
Yeah.
I need to keep up this appearance of, this is just easy and natural for me and everything's great. And I think they also have this fear that if they show that they're struggling in any way or that any part is hard, that they're going to be viewed as less of a mom or that they're not enjoying motherhood or some of those negative connotations. And it
Mm-hmm.
creates this atmosphere of, um, you know, guilt or, even shame where they just end up feeling more isolated from that.
Totally. Totally. Because on the surface have this beautiful brand new human, right? And you should just be happy and beaming. And like you, it took me a couple years to really work through all the things that came postpartum.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a big misconception that people think that you should just instantly be full of all of this joy and love and connection. And that's just not the case for every mom out there. Sometimes it is an absolute struggle to just maintain your own sanity during those times. You do have this beautiful human who is reliant on you, and it doesn't mean that you don't love them and treasure them and would do anything for them, but that doesn't mean you're still not struggling
Right.
to deal with that transition.
Exactly. They can coexist.
Yes. Yes, it's like the idea that you can, be sad about something but still laugh in the moment. You can
Mhm.
absolutely be joyful and loving of your child and wouldn't trade your child for the world, but also motherhood is really hard.
Mhm. It is. It is. And there's so many changes that happen, like physiological changes that happen, that when you think about it, it's like no wonder it
Hmm.
feels overwhelming. I mean, you
Right,
have obviously the hormonal fluctuations and
right.
imbalances, which take a long time. It takes a long time for your body to rebalance in
Hmm.
general. But if your body isn't getting what it needs to support that process, it can take even longer. There's nutrient depletion from
Hmm.
pregnancy and breastfeeding. Your body is beautifully designed to give the baby what it needs first, both during
Hmm.
pregnancy and in breastfeeding, which is what we want. But it also means that you're just getting what's left. Um,
Right.
so, pregnancy and breastfeeding are both very common states of nutrient depletion. You've got sleep deprivation, of course. You have that nervous system dysregulation of suddenly all these new responsibilities and having to be on all the time, and all the stressors, both physical and mental, that come with motherhood. And then, your life is completely changing. You're suddenly 100% focused on this baby and your family, and maybe you're not able to take care of yourself anymore the way that you used to. You're not as social as you used to be. You don't have time to pursue maybe other passions that you have. And then if you also experienced any prenatal or postnatal trauma that hasn't been addressed, that's an added layer that's just going to keep your body in fight or flight. So when you think about all of that, I mean, it's not surprising that how common it is for women to experience all types of different symptoms. And those symptoms are different for everyone, but
Mhm.
they're all signs that the body is overwhelmed and just needs some help to rebalance.
Definitely. And I think common gets confused for normal, normal gets
Yes.
confused for natural kind of thing, right? So,
Yes.
I think there's a lot of things to be said about that too, in that just because something is natural, something like childbirth, doesn't mean it necessarily is an easy transition, right?
Hmm.
And then just the expectation to accept all of that epic change in your life, seamlessly, right? Graciously, with a smile. I think that that is also something that I had a hard time with for sure.
Yeah,
And I know a lot of moms do.
you're so right because I mean we talked about the societal pressure to, portray this vision of, perfection in motherhood.
Mhm.
But then there's also the component that a lot of women maybe don't know that this doesn't have to be your new normal. Because I think that's the approach that they've seen a lot of other mothers take is, you know, this is just what happens. This is, I'm not able to change this. It's just how life goes. Now that I'm a mom, I'm going to be feeling these things and I just need to adjust. So it's both sides. It's the societal pressure and it's also the true belief that you're now stuck in feeling this way, which is not the case at all.
Right. And some of that has to do with the support you have around you, I would think too. I mean, that's
Yes.
something that varies greatly from mom to mom, from home to home. And if you aren't receiving what you need during that very life-changing time, that can affect too what you think you should just have to deal with or succumb to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many social, relationship, um, community factors that play into this process as well, which is why I'm just such a fan of the holistic approach because all of those factors should be taken into account
Mhm.
and addressed and making sure that the mom is getting support in a very well-rounded way in every aspect of their life.
Mhm. It's funny to think back on, and I didn't realize how important and meaningful it was at the time, but right after I had my son, and people kind of come and visit and want to like see you and the baby kind of thing, um, people will bring things for baby, right? They will bring, clothes or toys or this, whatever to like gift something to the new baby. One of like the many dozens of people that came to see us after my son was born, like brought me like I don't even remember specifically what it was, but some kind of like spa like package for me. And she's like, nobody thinks about mom, after this. Everybody's all focused on baby and nobody thinks about what mom might need. And that was a really thoughtful thing I remember thinking at the time because that is really true in a lot of ways. Everybody's super focused on mom when she's expecting, right? But as soon
Yes.
as baby comes out, baby, 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 and mom's over here like sometimes like in literal tears, like struggling and surviving. And she needs focus and attention and care and love too.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. I mean, you feel like a celebrity when you're pregnant, right? Because
Right.
of all the attention and
And
how
maybe it doesn't come
special.
in like a spa package, like that's just an example, but like something like
Yep.
just don't forget that mom also needs to be cared for during those very
Yes.
early stages of motherhood. Um,
Yes.
it's important to, I think, acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And if, for anyone listening who's in a position where they might be going through a postpartum period in the future, planning ahead and thinking through, if it's your first baby, you may not totally know what to expect and there will be some surprises, but putting that time and effort into thinking through how can I set myself up to be as supported as possible in my postpartum period, that's going to help the most. Because if you're like me and you didn't even think about it, you're just kind of like rolling with the punches afterwards. But if you have, frozen meals in your freezer,
Right.
or I know I have friends who've done it's called like the meal train,
Yeah.
where friends will bring meals, just anything you can think of that will lighten your load and
Hmm.
give you more, whether it's more time to yourself, more time just to snuggle with your baby, whatever the case is, it all makes a huge difference. Because you're right, not everyone else is going to be thinking about that. It's sadly something that as the mom, you're probably going to have to put a lot of, thinking and effort into.
Definitely. And I just feel like there's a lot of there's a lot that needs to be addressed in that regard because you're kind of just expected to like carry on as
Mhm.
normal for a long time after
Yeah.
baby is here or immediately after baby is here. And even if you have a C-section, even if you are, recovering from a surgery after baby is born, there's still this pull to kind of get back at it and get back into the routine of things sooner rather than
Mhm.
later. And I think that that is something that is unreasonable. And
Mhm.
you don't think about it though ahead of time. Like you said, you're not really thinking about what that might look like post baby. So to really empower yourself ahead of time and ask for what you want and need,
Mhm.
or at least align things to be able to receive what you need ahead of time is hard for a lot of us, first and foremost, right? Because most of us are
Yes.
used to like just having all these things in motion without asking for help.
Right.
But it's so important postpartum.
Absolutely. Um, and I mean, even factors like if you work outside of the home, um, that pressure to come back to work pretty
Hmm.
quickly. I mean, in the US, we don't have the best, compared to some other countries, we don't have the best maternity leave, um, and support. So that's a factor for a lot of women, is
Yeah.
feeling like they're going through this postpartum process, but simultaneously they're expected to return to work and to perform at that same optimal level at work than they did before.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, the medical system and insurance systems are other factors as well when trying to get support, um, or maybe just figure out reasons they may have certain symptoms. So there's so many aspects that can play into it that make it hard. And when a mom is already exhausted and
Yeah.
overwhelmed, that's a really hard time to be putting in, additional effort to track down how to help make yourself feel better.
For sure. And something that you said there at the end of that, there's already so much like kind of on mom. It always
Mm-hmm.
amazes me. I've said this before, probably in other conversations here too, but especially as a new parent, like you have your baby. And most of us still have our babies in the hospital, right? I mean, I know many moms that are moving more towards home birth, and that's beautiful and magical and can be amazing. But most of us are still going to the hospital, right?
Yeah.
Um, where there are professionals around us who are helping us through like those couple days right after, right? But then you're just trusted to go out into the world with this brand new human, and it is just assumed that you know what you're doing and that you're going to give them what they need and keep them alive. And I think that's terrifying, quite honestly. You're just expected, even all the preparing that you do ahead of time. You can read all the books, you can listen to all the things and have all the advice in the world. But when you walk out of that hospital and it is just up to you, right? and your partner perhaps and whatever support you have around you. But like that's huge. Like this is such a huge undertaking, the responsibility of another human who is totally
Yeah.
helpless and dependent on you. And I thought that even in my early stages of motherhood, I'm like, nobody's coming to check to make sure that this is going well. Nobody's coming to like make sure this is happening how it should, you know? I mean, nobody says you have to go
Yeah,
for wellness checks. You don't have nobody, you know, it's like that to me felt very scary.
it is. I mean, exactly. When you describe it like that and it's 100% true, it's like that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. For sure. And instinctually, I think, there is some knowing, like, that your body is built to nourish and feed your baby. You know that, you can provide comfort and compassion to your baby. And there's things that you instinctively know to do, but there's a lot that could happen that
Yeah.
is just so like out of your realm of expertise, most of us, out of the scope of what we would know. And yeah, I mean, that in and of itself, just coming home with this brand new human, never mind all the other things that have changed around you, but just that is epic.
So true. I feel like there were so many instances, especially in the first few months, but even years
Yeah.
after having a baby, where I'm thinking, how did no one teach me this? Like, I had to figure it out for myself, but like, why is this not common knowledge? Or like, why is there not a required course on all of these things? It's mind-boggling for sure.
And some of it too is interesting to think about in the way of we're very fortunate to have a lot of resources these
Yes.
days. I mean, what about like our grandmothers and their grandmothers before them? Um, that seems even harder, maybe. And I think in thinking back in those generations, things were done in a more tribal kind of way in terms of like you had more people supporting you. Maybe there was generational living going on in homes where there was the mother before you, very close and available to tend to baby's needs and things like that, where that's not really the way of our world anymore. You pretty much
Right.
disconnect from your parents and grandparents in terms of at least living with them quite early in adulthood, most of us. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but there's just not that immediate support and knowledge readily available in that way. Now we go to like Google for it, which is scary.
It is scary. It is scary. You got to take all that with a grain of salt. But you're right. There was more of that built-in tribe um,
Mhm.
in previous generations, and you're right. Now we have less of, you know, firsthand wisdom to tap
Yeah.
into. At
Hmm.
least, like you said, living together. And now it's more of a Google, like, what can you tell me about this?
Yeah.
Which is sometimes helpful and sometimes the opposite.
Right. And being able to like do it on your own, I think is way too glorified in our society these days.
Yes.
Reaching and asking for help is something that is often looked at shamefully, where before in previous generations, that was just the way of life. You did things together
Yes.
in community with your people, and everybody contributed and helped. I mean, that saying of it takes a village, I think is real, and we've gotten very far away from that. And I think that's part of the reason it is harder for moms postpartum.
Completely agree. And we have the social media layer as well, which same as Google, some of it is therapeutic and
Hmm.
helpful, and some of it is, wow, I feel like a terrible mom because look at
Right.
this perfect home environment that this mom has, and she has so much energy to do all these activities. And, it's that comparison comes into play, and that can really be difficult for moms because it's not realistic. It's not.
No.
And it really skews the idea, or expectations of motherhood.
Absolutely. Sarah, I think you really hit it right there. The illusion that we see on social media that people are living these perfect, polished lives. For one thing, I mean, in our logical mind, we know that's not true. But when you feel like you are just in it, like in the thick of it, and you're walking around with every possible secretion from your baby on your own clothes and in your hair, and you haven't changed your pajamas in 2 days or showered in a week. And, I don't know about you, but that was my truth very early on. And
Yes.
you feel very inadequate when you look at other people's images of perfection, um, which probably is absolutely not true. Not probably, it is absolutely not
Yeah.
true. That might have been a moment in time
Yes.
amongst like being peed on or thrown up on, wiping food off of your face that your baby threw at you, any number of situations, but we know that that is not how it goes.
Absolutely. Yes. And we talked about community earlier, but having that real life, you know, mom group, if you can find one,
Mhm.
your mom friends who are going to be real and you can chat with them on, whether it's venting or just, it could be venting or it could be, gushing about how awesome being a mom is. And, you can go through the highs and lows together and you know that everyone is genuine and
Mhm.
being real. That's so much more supportive and powerful than looking at strangers on social media and thinking that's reality and what you should be comparing to.
For sure. One of the best indicators for me, in knowing that I can relate to another mom and we are not trying to like impress each other with the illusion of perfect, is if I walk into somebody's home and it is a hot mess and she made no effort to like do anything about it before I got there. I mean, you know, I'm not talking about like dirty, like unsanitary conditions, but I'm
Right.
talking about somebody who has just focused on their child throughout the day and not worried about picking up every little Cheerio per se, every little toy that is all over the floor. There's probably dishes in the sink, maybe something spilled on the counter and it's not wiped up. And, there's a lot of people that pass judgment about that kind of thing, but I feel like those are my people.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's so unrealistic to think that everything could be perfect at
Yeah.
every given time of the day.
Hmm.
Just giving yourself grace and choosing in the moment what is most important for
Right.
yourself and your family. Is your family safe and happy and healthy?
Hmm.
And that's most important, not this external, vision of perfection.
Absolutely. I'm not worried about my kids' fingerprints on the wall. I'm really
Yeah.
not, but I've known moms that walk around behind their children, literally cleaning up behind them all day long. And to me, that's not sending the right message to my kid, first off, but also I'm missing so much in trying to like maintain this
Right.
clean, sanitary environment for my kid. Um, but Sarah, I would love for you to share with us what you did for yourself. How did you pull yourself out of all of these like trenches, so to speak, that we're talking about in early motherhood?
Yeah, for sure. So I realized that while this was all certainly common to experience in motherhood, like we said, it wasn't necessarily normal or the way that my body was supposed to be functioning. So I realized I needed to advocate for myself and really
Mm.
start exploring what was going on and how I could address it. And this is, like I mentioned, it's something that moms can struggle with because finding the time and energy when you're in the thick of things is really difficult. But specifically, what I did is taking a holistic approach. So I really dug into figuring out what my unique contributing factors were. So thinking critically about what had happened in my postpartum experience up to that point and also looking at my current lifestyle and taking all those holistic aspects of my health and wellness into account. So that could be things like inflammation, hormones, nervous system regulation, gut health, those nutrient stores we talked about, toxic load, lifestyle balance. There's so many factors to think through, and that will obviously look different for every person. But when I was thinking about myself, there were several contributing factors that came to mind that I didn't realize at the time. So I had mastitis at 3 weeks postpartum and had to take antibiotics for that, which probably messed with my gut health. And around that same time, my child started showing signs of food intolerances. And it took several months to figure out, what all of the triggers were. But due to, me having to cut so many allergens out of my diet for that since I was breastfeeding, I didn't realize it at the time, but what I was eating, like what was left to eat that was safe, was not as diverse as it ideally should have been, and was probably worsening that nutrient depletion that we were talking about that happens in pregnancy and during breastfeeding. Which so all of that probably further worsened my gut health, and like I said, these contributing factors are specific to me. So that, it's so important for moms to take their own, extremely individualized approach and identify what their own contributing factors were leading up to, whatever symptoms they're feeling. And it's part of what I love about what I do is because I get to empower moms in that journey. So learning to listen to their body's cues, thinking holistically about what their body needs and identifying feasible ways to make that happen. And then in addition to thinking about contributing factors and like what had happened up to that point, I also thought about my daily routine. So like, what are the activities I'm doing every day and how can I make small, feasible changes where I can optimize the energy and the resources that I'm providing to my body and minimize the stress and depletion that I was subjecting it to. So, yeah, taking that holistic lens was huge for me. And I was, let me tell you, shocked when my exhaustion and overstimulation majorly improved in just a couple weeks of making those adjustments, which was incredible.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's incredible, and everybody wants to know what those little adjustments are.
Yeah.
For sure. Um, and I know that you work with women as a coach to help with their own individual journeys, because I know it's really hard to say, we'll do this and do that, because everybody's situation is really unique. So when you're working with somebody who is struggling with any number of these things, where do you start with them to help identify what the priority is in terms of what they need?
Yeah. So we start with a very in-depth, holistic self-assessment. So, because a lot of times women are, moms specifically, are experiencing things in areas of their life that they don't even realize.
Mm.
Like there may be areas of their lifestyle that they're not even thinking about when they think about improving their health and wellness. So we dive into all those different areas. We get a sense of how they're feeling in those areas. If there's any, specific stressors in those areas, or if they're having symptoms in those areas. And from there, it can become very clear pretty quickly where they need targeted attention. And we don't try to boil the ocean. This is not a, change everything about your entire life in one day.
Yeah.
But we prioritize from there. So where are you experiencing the biggest drain? Like where is your body really struggling? And we dive into that first. Or maybe some of my clients, there's several areas and they really personally feel strongly about one specific area that they want to start in, and of course that's where we'll start. And then going from there, so digging into, why is this happening? Why are
Mhm.
these your symptoms? Let's go through specifically, day to day, what's contributing to this. And we find ways to adjust their lifestyle, behaviors, mindset in a way that will help them address that. And like I said, not boiling the ocean. We are not going to take an approach that's going to be, not sustainable. The
Right.
goal is for it to be feasible, for it to make sense for their life. You know, and that's why I also say take what you hear online with a grain of salt. Like if someone's advertising some magical lifestyle change that's going to cure everything, um, it might work fantastic for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work great for you. So that's why it's important to figure out what's going to work best for your own life, your body, um, your values, your preferences, all that's taken into account and making changes. And then also exploring your motivation. Um, what is this going to do for your life? Because that motivation is what's going to keep you successful long term.
Mhm. I think we can get so hung up in thinking our routine or rhythms of the day should be the same as somebody else that we see who we perceive is doing it correctly, right? Who we
Right.
think is having success in the challenges of motherhood, only to find out that that magic pill or potion or um, maybe it's not something you ingest. Maybe it's the yoga practice that you force yourself to do and hate, right? Like just
Right.
because somebody else loves it and it's working well for them doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit for you. So I feel like there's so much to be said about that for sure. I would love to hear you share about a couple of the most common things that women are struggling with and don't realize it. Like when you're identifying
Yeah.
those needs for where to start with your clients and the places that they don't even realize are the biggest problems. What are some of those things?
For sure. So of course, diet and exercise are going to be at the top of everyone's mind, because that's what you hear the most about. Things that are less top of mind that can be contributing factors would be things like your sense of community. What
Mhm.
is your work environment like? Are there toxic aspects to, you know, relationships either at work or with your friends or at home? Um, because the social component is just as important as, physically what you're eating and your
Mhm.
movement. It's such a strong factor as well. Um, Also, a lot of people don't think about nervous system regulation. Um, I think it's becoming more, there's more information becoming available about your nervous system. But when you're in an overstimulated state, the way that you take care of yourself, the way you exercise, the way you eat, all of those factors and your needs can be very different than if you're not like if your nervous system is regulated. So that's another area that women may feel, uninformed about or just not be thinking about. Um, yeah, I would say those are probably like the top ones that are not on people's minds.
Less talked about areas for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so the nervous system regulation, I'm interested in that aspect of it for sure. And would you say that that ebbs and flows in terms of like it's not the same in all stages of motherhood,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. I think certainly it can be thrown off the first couple years, because all of the new responsibilities, all of the changes that are, happening so suddenly. Um, but the tricky part is once it's dysregulated, you kind of have to be purposeful and proactive with getting it regulated, or it can, the symptoms you're experiencing can last for a long time. Um, but yes, depending on the stressors that are going on at the time, you can be, more or less overstimulated or, insert whatever specific symptom that you're feeling from that. And for me, it was so interesting to find out, and this is common for moms. If you're, a mom who's looking to lose the baby weight, or, that's kind of what is top of your mind, but you're
Mhm.
also overstimulated or having nervous system dysregulation, the harder you exercise, the worse you're making that dysregulation.
Mm,
Same thing with if you're not eating enough. When you think about what that's actually doing to the body, is it's exhausting it even more. And so, like you said, it can ebb and flow over time, but it's not just the stress, like family stress, or
mm,
if your child is um, ill, or stressors like that obviously come into play, but it also is affected by all of those other lifestyle factors and activities. So yeah, it can definitely ebb and flow, but if you have top of mind those key areas where you can focus on and make sure that you're supporting your body, you can make it much more stable.
sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, so we talked a little bit about not necessarily just surrendering all of yourself into motherhood. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a give and take with that. I mean, I'm definitely somebody that held on to and still continue to hold on to a lot of who I was prior to having a child. Um, and it may look different now than it did before motherhood.
Mhm.
But one thing I feel like I'd love your opinion on, is just the comings and goings of what was before versus what is after. And specifically, what I mean by that is the desire to hold on to connections or friendships that were really tight or connective prior to having a child, and then they change after. Um, I think that's something that I struggled with a lot in early motherhood, where it felt like, especially people that didn't have children, right?
Mhm.
It felt like, you want to carry on with who you always were into motherhood, but suddenly you have a lot less to talk about and a lot less in common with people who you were
Yeah.
very close to before
Yeah.
having children. And it's like that idea of like not everybody's meant to stay, but there's a lot of stress in that type of succumbing to, I guess I'll say.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're bringing that up because it's such a common thing too.
Mm,
Um, and it's really difficult. I would say in terms of what you were saying about, the before versus the after, it's very common to feel somewhat of an identity crisis
mm,
during that transition. And the way I like to think about it is it's not you're a different person now. It's you are still the same person, but your life has expanded. And now you are also a mother. You still have all the same hobbies and passions and personality and social activities and desires as you did before, but you just have this added layer, this beautiful new layer of life now.
mhm,
But you're right, for especially for friends who don't have kids and maybe can't relate to what you're going through or what your new schedule is. The common thing you hear about is, if you have a friend who doesn't have a kid and they're rolling their eyes because you can't come to an event because it's during your child's nap time, and you're just not, you feel like you're not on the same wavelength anymore.
right.
um, which can be very stressful because it can feel like this is happening because I am now a mom. It'd be much easier to say, oh, we grew apart for other reasons, or um, lost touch for just naturally, but it can feel so abrupt when you're suddenly a mom and your life changes in the blink of an eye, and then you start to feel those changes. So in my own experience, I was very fortunate to not have that situation. My friends even who didn't have kids were um, very fortunately just very supportive and very interested in getting to know my child, and just wanting to be involved, and that's so wonderful and fun when it happens. But if it's not happening, I think the best you can do is do what you can to bridge that gap, finding ways to hang out with that friend that doesn't interrupt your schedule with motherhood, whether it's, they join you on a walk, like taking your child on a walk or going to the park. The activities could look different than they used to, but it's still possible to find that time and connection. And if that friend is not there for it, they don't, they just want to stay in how your relationship was previously or not have it at all. I think that probably says more about that friend than maybe on your end what's going on, which is
Hmm.
harsh to say, but and it doesn't make it easier if that's what you're
Yeah.
experiencing. But I would say staying true to what your gut is telling you, what's going to support you physically, mentally in this process, which, like we talked about, the social aspect is very important for taking care of yourself.
Mm.
But finding those connections that are going to be supportive, uplifting, and positive, and not making you feel bad about the stage of life that you're in.
Right. That part there, especially, I feel like we can get really stuck in that as if we owe somebody some type of presence or energy from ourselves, when
Right.
really that's not true at all. But I love what you said earlier in um, what you just shared, the word expansive. You have just expanded on who you are. A lot of people look at entering parenthood and motherhood specifically as like a limiting way of life, right? Like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I'm a mom, or oh, I have to give that up. I have a kid now, kind of thing. And I mean, if you could just change that wording and change that mindset, that word expansive that you used is so on point. If you could just see it in that light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
I love that so much because I feel like everybody thinks about the things they can no longer do, but nobody really is putting attention on all the things you get to do now
Right.
because you have expanded into motherhood.
Right. And it's such a good point because it probably feels that way because, especially at the beginning, it feels like everything has just transferred. Like when you think
Mhm.
about where is my time and energy going, it has most likely almost 100% transferred from what it used to be to focusing on motherhood.
Mhm.
And I also want to normalize that a little bit, especially at the beginning. It's totally normal to feel overwhelmed, to feel like you've been thrown into the deep end. And you only have so much time in the day, you only have so much energy. And it makes total sense that you would need to be fully focused on your child and your family. So
Mhm.
give yourself grace with that as well. Don't feel like you have to, you know, you've given birth yesterday and oh, I haven't had my social activities for the week yet. Like you don't have to be perfectly balanced from day one. There's
Mhm.
definitely phases that you go through. But I think over time, you're right. Like getting back to that new way of thinking that's not restrictive, but it's expansive, and you can get there. I think
Mhm.
that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And you have so many resources for helping moms navigate this journey and especially the early stages of it and um, making sure that women are taking care of themselves along with their children. One of the resources that you have is the guide to 8 motherhood eating habits that worsen our exhaustion and overstimulation. I'm not going to give it all away. I want people to, there'll be a link in the show notes for our listeners to grab that guide and be very enlightened by a lot of what is shared in that. One thing I think that happens a lot. One of these mentions in the guide is just simple things that you can do to take care of yourself, like not standing up while you're eating, like really giving yourself permission to sit and eat at the table like everybody else's is, I mean, it seems like it should be obvious, but I can't tell you the amount of times I stand at the counter and eat and others are not,
Right.
it's just this. And I don't even know why, but things like that that you have made available to people to help start changing the reality of moms just struggling very early on with all the things, whether it's overstimulation, exhaustion, just the overwhelm, and all of the changes, we'll just say,
Yes.
that come along with it. Um, if you could choose something for moms from the beginning that just changes universally so that this whole initiation into mothering is easier, what would it be?
Ooh, that's hard to put into one thing, but I would say I'll do a combination of a couple of things. I would say being proactive because as we talked about, this is an area that, both from a societal perspective and a medical perspective, um, there aren't necessarily going to be built in or, built in support that you can necessarily wait for in a, passive sense. I think being proactive in listening to your body, not sitting with symptoms for too long before starting to think about like, I wonder what could be contributing to this. Um, Remembering that you're in the driver's seat and you have more power and influence over your health and wellness than you think you do.
Mm.
Um, you don't have to be a passenger. You can make a real difference for yourself. And then also remembering to utilize that holistic approach and also the personalized approach. And if you're going into it with that lens, I think that's going to help a ton.
That was also very valuable. Thank you for sharing that. And I
Yeah,
really connected with what you said about listening to your body and not necessarily thinking that the solutions for what you need are outside of yourself.
exactly. Yes. I think we've gotten used to, oh, I'm having this symptom. What should I do? And like you
Hmm.
said, that external, um, going to that external source for guidance.
Right.
And that's why that personalized aspect and listening to yourself and not just doing what everyone else is doing is super important and it's going to give you the most success.
Absolutely. And because even though it's really hard and can be uncomfortable at times, um, motherhood and um, birthing and nurturing your child, it all is very natural. And you do know what to do if you probably just quiet the noise around you and maybe stop looking at everybody else's life on socials during those early stages and just really listening to yourself and trusting yourself. I feel like there's such a lack of that in our culture as moms. We're always looking, and you want your tribe, right? You need the support, but also what feels good to you. I think there's a lot of just trusting those outside sources to tell us what we should be doing without us really deciding if that's best for us and for our child.
Completely agree. And your body's really smart.
Hmm.
If you give it those extra, resources and then extra energy that it needs, it knows exactly what to do with it. You
Mm.
don't have to tell it, improve this specific symptom. Like it will know what to do and you're going to see the benefits.
For sure. And I think the other side of that too is we live in such a instant type of culture. Um, Being patient with yourself. Like it's maybe not going to whatever is ailing you, whether it's physically, mentally, it might take a minute, but that doesn't mean your body doesn't know what to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, if you were to leave our listeners thinking about something as they um, just finish this episode with us today, what would you like them to hear?
I would love to just leave them with a hopeful, positive attitude. Um, if you're feeling like you're just in the thick of it and not sure where to start to feel better, Um, just remember, what we've talked about with, the fact that we have so much more power than we think, um, and small steps. It doesn't have to be instant. Any small change you can make in a positive direction, all those things will add up over time. So I think that's what I'd want to leave the audience with is just being hopeful and knowing that it's in their power.
Thank you for being an amazing mom, for helping
Thank
the rest
you.
of us remember we can be amazing moms. I think it's important to remind ourselves of that. And I'm very appreciative of people like yourself who are helping us along the way. And, of course, always to stay connected with you and for our listeners to reach out to you. They'll all be in the show notes, along with the link to your amazing guide, the free guide to 8 motherhood eating habits that worsen exhaustion and overstimulation. Grab that, listeners. It is definitely eye-opening, informative, and a great place to start, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sarah, so much.
Thank you for having me.